You are listening to The Black Landscape with Andrea Spearman, where Black excellence is always trending. Welcome back, everybody. This is your host, Andrea Spearman, and this is The Black Landscape. Today, we are joined by Dani Offline, multi-instrumentalist, vocalist, producer, and songwriter. Hi, Dani. Welcome.
Hi. Thank you for having me.
Yes, we're so excited to talk to you today. So, Dani, you're originally from Birmingham, Alabama, right?
Yes, I am. That's where I was born.
How did you get here to the Bay Area?
Well, I'm kind of from a couple of different places. I was born in Birmingham, Alabama, and I lived there until I was about 9. And then my mom and I moved to Washington, D.C., and we lived there for 2 years. And then after that, we moved to Guam, which is an island in the South Pacific. And that's actually where I spent like most of my, I guess you could say childhood or like sentient life. Yeah, that's where I went to middle school and high school. And I graduated from high school in Guam. And then I went to school in New Jersey. Right, but you asked me how I got to the Bay Area. So after college, I moved to California because I had actually a fellowship like teaching music education for an after-school program. And that was 1 year. And then after that, I had known that I wanted to go to grad school. And so I applied to UC Berkeley, to the comparative literature PhD program, and I got in. And that's what had me move to the Bay Area. And that's why I live in Oakland now. And I love it here. I love it here. Like it's a perfect fit for me.
We love to hear that in the Bay. You're welcome. Come on in. That's what we want to hear.
Yeah, for real. I would say, it's definitely, I don't know. It's funny because just yesterday I actually had to go to the DMV, and I kind of surprised myself because I was able to go to the DMV without using maps, like without using directions. And it felt like, oh man, I don't know. It feels like the Bay is becoming home if I can get around without maps and like I know my way and stuff like that.
I love that for you.
Thank you. Yeah, I really like it here.
Well, that's great. Yes, we welcome folks who want to make this home and who appreciate the culture. But let's back up just a little bit. Let's go back to Guam because how was that experience growing up as a Black child?
Yeah. I mean, listen, like I love Guam. It's literally paradise. It was really challenging though, because in my entire school, which was kindergarten through 12th grade, I was the only Black student there. And so for a lot of people that I met, like I was the first Black person that they'd ever met in real life. So that was wild. And I remember, especially when I first moved, it was really hard because kids can be really mean and like, I don't know. It's definitely not like the experience that like my dad had growing up, for example. Like he grew up in Alabama, in Birmingham in the 60s. Right. And so he integrated the schools that he went to. And like, I mean, I don't even know I don't even know how difficult that must have been. But growing up on Guam was really hard because, I mean, it was just me and my mom. And I felt like I was so far away from everything that had been familiar to me. And it was a really difficult transition. I'd say by the time that I moved, though, I found my place, I found my friends, and Guam still really feels like home. It's a place that I know the best. And my mom and we went back for the holidays in 2019, and yeah, it felt like coming back to my hometown. So it's weird to have a hometown that's like so far away and is a place where my parents don't live anymore, but all of my friends from my childhood live there. So we try and go back as much as we can. But yeah, it's funny how something so unfamiliar turned into a place that really feels like home to me.
Yeah. So did you grow up singing there? Did that like spark the love of singing for you?
Oh, yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, I feel like I've been singing since as long as I can remember. I grew up singing in church when I was a kid in Alabama. And so singing, especially like church in the South, like that, I think that is like the best musical education you can have. And like even now when I play with instrumentalists who grew up playing instruments in church, like Yeah, you have to know your stuff. So that's how I first started singing. And actually, when I was still in Guam, I also sang in church. There was this like gospel church service. That was one of the like only gospel church services on island, and so I sang in church there. And I actually did sound. So like when I wasn't singing in the children's choir, I was like a tiny little 12-year-old in the sound booth because they didn't have anybody else to do it. So I think I definitely learned a lot about not just like music and singing, but also sound design. I think women, especially women of color who are producers, are so underrepresented. And like, I think the fact that I got into this is really just by a stroke of luck. Like that barrier to entry is so high. And I think just kind of feeling comfortable with instruments and feeling comfortable with the technology. I just got that from a young age, and kind of was just thrust into like a space that I probably had no business being in, but I don't know, people trusted me to not mess it up. And yeah, I think Guam, especially because I was there when I was like an adolescent, from the time that I was, 11 to the time that I graduated high school. I think even though I had always, sung before, and I'd done, children's choirs, even like professional children's choirs, and had done like opera also as a kid, like singing like in the children's like chorus of like operas and stuff when I was in DC. I had like that like classical background, but I think in Guam also, just because I was a teenager, I started experimenting with writing my own music, and I had friends who also wrote music too, and it made me think, oh yeah, I could do this. This is something that I would want to do. And I don't know, the more I did it, the more I fell in love with it. I think it was really a huge coping mechanism for me also, because I moved around so much as a kid.
There was something that you said there. It's like they brought you into the booth and trusted you. That's such an amazing thing for adults to have that, to see that quality in you at such a young age, to be like, she know what she's doing. We can bring her in. She's, this young lady's paying attention. She clearly wants to, learn more. That's amazing that, to have adults cultivate that in you so early.
I agree. And thank you for pointing that out. It really makes me think about it more deeply, because I think at the time I just thought, oh yeah, like they need somebody to do this. And I'm like an overachieving 12-year-old who is like always here. But yeah, I think, yeah, it was about trust. And I think also just, I remember the like music department sort of like at that church was a very, supportive environment, I think. And I've been in like a lot of musical spaces that aren't as supportive. And I think it's interesting. Like, I think like I think people don't talk about how like rigorous like musical education is in like a church environment. Like you have to know your stuff. You have to be there. You have to be on time. You have to be ready for whatever changes, because people will change the arrangement in the middle of the song.
Child, don't even get me start. Been there too, growing up in church choirs. Like, wait, what we doing?
Right, no, exactly. And you just kind of have to like flow with it. I think it also, speaking of trust, like it really taught me, I think, from a young age. But again, like this is something that I really struggle with, like trusting my intuition in music, and just going where it leads me. I think my songwriting process a long time ago used to be kind of like feeling like I had to create something out of thin air. Like it, like it felt almost like similar to like writing a paper or like writing an email. Like I had, I think it was way too formulaic the way that I approached music in the past. And I think kind of returning to music the way that I did as a child makes me see it much more intuitively. And now the way that I approach it is almost like the song already exists, but I just have to like pull it out from somewhere. Like it's more of like a process of not creating something out of thin air, but like receiving, I guess, something, or intuiting something that already exists.
I like that. Receiving something that already exists. That's excellent. This is such a dynamic background that you're coming from. So how did you get to Princeton?
Oh, right. Oh my gosh.
You're such a world traveler, and your life is taking all these twists and turns. Yeah, go back to Princeton. What happened? How did you get
Right, right,
there?
right, right. Well, I mean, like I said, I was an overachieving kid. So I think that's how I ended up at Princeton. Um, and I mean, I don't know. I think growing up, both my parents went to college. So growing up, it always felt, in like a good way and a bad way, like I had to go to college. Like that wasn't a question.
Oh yeah.
And I think also as a kid, like I really wanted to make my parents proud, and I still do. Um, and yeah, that's why I went to Princeton. It also like I think, I mean, I loved my college experience. Like but at the same time, I think like everything that I loved the most about my college experience happened outside of the institution, if that makes sense. Like the friends that I made, and the music that I made, like collaborating with people who I really loved and trusted, even like professors and administrators who, did things that just simply like were not their job description, like going above and beyond for students. I think that was like what was most meaningful to me in college. But yeah, it was a huge change. It was funny going to Princeton, which is like an incredibly white institution. But I had growing up in Guam, like when I came to Princeton, I mean, my graduating class in high school had like 28 people. So Princeton was not
wow.
only, I know, yeah, exactly. So even though Princeton is like a small school, it was the biggest school I had ever been to. And it had the most Black people of any school I had ever been to. Even though like, I grew up like around Black family members and stuff like that. But it was different, like in going to school with people who looked like me. Which is funny because I think my experience at Princeton is only like a tiny, tiny piece of what someone would get going to like an HBCU, right? And being surrounded by Black people all the time and just like truly like in community in that way. But to me, like it felt amazing.
Absolutely. Yeah. When you think Princeton, you absolutely do not think about a large number of Black folks being there,
No,
and then
absolutely not.
an even smaller amount being in this specific department and study.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Tell me about it. Like the department I was in, it was very clear to me that I was one of very few Black people historically who had even like been in that department, not let alone like the only Black person at the time. Also, like, and I think this was really trippy to me being someone from the South. Like Princeton is the southernmost Ivy League, and so historically, I mean, I think that's why Princeton kind of has this historical association with being more conservative than other Ivy League institutions because it's the most southern one. And because historically, very wealthy families in the South, plantation owning families would send their children there. And so I remember there was this, I used to work an on-campus job, and there was a tree in the backyard of the building where I worked. And I found out, a year later that Princeton had sold slaves on location, like on campus, underneath that tree. And I saw sort of like a woodblock carving of a slave auction that happened right under that tree, the tree that I had walked under, every day to go to my on-campus job. Even like, especially in some of the older dorm buildings, they'll have like a weird setup where it'll be one really big common room and then like a really small dorm room, like a big common room with like a fireplace and big windows. And then randomly there would be like a dorm room where two, college sophomores have like a bunk bed or whatever. And I remember talking to my friend being like, who came up with this? Why would they have a big, huge room and then a big, huge common room and then a tiny little dorm room? That doesn't make any sense. And he told me, well, when these buildings were built, the common room was actually the dorm room. And where we sleep, like the dorm room now, is where people used to keep their slaves. People used to keep their servants in that small room.
Wow.
Yeah. So it has especially coming from the South, like it feels like almost every institution that you interact with has that history.
Yeah. Yeah. But that's why we need more of us in these spaces, reclaiming them and, setting these places on fire with our goals, our dreams, our excellence, and taking over these spaces.
I agree. I think also really important to not just being present in spaces is like really questioning them
Mm-hmm.
and asking ourselves why we specifically have been allowed in these spaces at this moment, um, as opposed
Yeah.
to other groups or even people who look like us who weren't allowed in those spaces. Like I think, yeah, it's like the whole with great power comes responsibility, and I think that was something that I had to kind of learn the hard way at school. Like getting into a great college isn't enough. Like you have to demand things of
Mm.
institutions that offer you privileges, and really be very skeptical of them. Yeah, but I mean, but that said, like, yeah, I mean, I love my time at college, and but I think because I loved it so much, like I reserve the right to question what I was taught and question why I even had a good time in that space,
Mm-hmm.
and be grateful, of course, but also like always like asking questions of like how I can, create space for others, and what about me like could I don't know. It's something that I think about a lot. I met
Mm-hmm.
like lifelong friends there, um, and yeah, I don't know. It's just something that I think about, I guess.
Yeah, no, it's definitely for us to think about and process and really ponder upon within our own selves, like how can we create spaces, how can we carve out these spaces for ourselves and for future folks who look like us.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, speaking of like music, Princeton's jazz department like literally raised me. Um, but yeah, I mean, I was one of like two, three Black people in the department, which is hilarious because it's jazz. Like,
Hello.
right? Like the irony is not lost on me.
That's a whole
um,
nother conversation.
right. That's a whole other conversation. And like, I love jazz. I love Princeton's jazz department. But yeah, it is like I don't know. It's like it feels like being in a haunted house or something.
Mm.
Sometimes, yeah, I don't know. And this isn't just specific to where I went to college or the jazz
Mm-hmm.
program that I was in, but like a lot of institutions, they feel like a haunted house. Like the things that go bump in the night really, really, really do exist. Like the example that I told you about of, dorm rooms having been built with the express purpose of having enslaved people living there in small quarters. Like I
Mm-hmm.
think it's, you can be in a house and understand how beautiful it is, understand what an incredible privilege it is to be there, and also recognize that there are ghosts in the attic. Like,
Mm.
yeah, I don't
There's
know.
some spooks at the door.
Right? But it's nothing to be afraid of. It's
No,
it's
no,
like,
it's
but it's and maybe it's not so much ghosts as almost like the way that I view of it is almost like an ancestral connection.
mm-hmm.
I think especially like in kind of like elite like academic institutions, there's kind of this whole like, oh, I'm living my ancestors' wildest dreams. And I think that that's like a really beautiful and like positive statement. But also sometimes like I don't know, lately I've been thinking about like I don't know, like were my ancestors really thinking about that? Like did they were they really like toiling under the Alabama sun thinking like, "Oh, I hope my great 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 granddaughter goes to an Ivy League institution." Like I think they, you know. So I almost don't want to kid myself on in terms of that connection. I think my
Mm-hmm.
ancestors probably dreamed of like actually getting sleep and like having loving connections with people around them,
Mm-hmm.
being able to relax and like enjoy their day. I think that probably was what my ancestors dreamt of. But at the
Mm-hmm.
same time, like, whenever I have some accomplishment in my life or do something that I'm proud of, or, especially back when I was at school and like in the jazz program, I thought like, okay, maybe my ancestors didn't dream of this, but they might think this is cool. But I don't know.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. And what I glean from that saying about our ancestors' wildest dreams, I think it's really talking about us being able to move in ways that they couldn't. And
Right,
that's really
exactly.
just the basics of it. No matter if it's just being able to vote, whether it's being able to launch ourselves into these industries that they just couldn't even imagine, whether it's, being a multi-instrumentalist and them, barely remembering the instruments from their homelands. It's
Mm-hmm.
pushing beyond, where they were in that moment. And I appreciate for balancing, the positive and the negative of that, because sometimes it can be overwhelming to be in a space where our ancestors were previously suffering and feeling
Mm-hmm.
that we have to, step beyond that and be at the top of our game.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Hey family, it's me, Andrea. Did you know that I also host a video series called 10 in 10? 10 questions in 10 minutes. It's a series of quick insights with the local Bay Area dance community. Guests include Vogue Ballroom King Sir Jacques, Two-Spirit Mover Javier Stelfresquez, Polyrhythmic Queen Jessica Racinos, and more. YouTube link in the description of this episode. Now back to the show. We are back with Dani Offline. So how many instruments can you actually play, sis?
Okay, so I've been playing piano since I was like 5. And I sing, so I count that as an instrument.
Mm-hmm.
I can play the clarinet because I was a band kid. And I also play bassoon because I was the bassoon.
Mm-hmm.
So the bassoon is like a huge woodwind instrument. The way that I learned to play the bassoon was honestly for the jokes, for the laughs. Because in middle school band, my friend Rennie and I, we were like, wouldn't it be hilarious if we played bassoon? Because it's a huge instrument and it was bigger than me at the time. And when we had, band recitals, like when we would walk on stage with our bassoon, people would start clapping and stuff. So that's why I play the bassoon, for the laughs. And then I started learning to play guitar about 3 years ago. Oh, actually, so this is a deep cut. I also play the erhu, which is a Chinese violin.
Oh,
it's a traditional violin because I don't speak any Chinese anymore. I took it for like 7 years, and my mom is huge on languages, and so am I. And when I was a kid, she put me in Chinese school, but this is like Chinese school for like Chinese children, where like their parents want them to learn their culture and learn the language. And my mom was like, "What if you also went to Chinese school?
Like, while you're here in Guam."
Well, no, the crazy thing is this was in Alabama. Alabama. With like the world's smallest Chinese community.
Oh goodness, mom was doing it big.
my mom is just like that. She's such a Sagittarius. She's so like, what if you just emailed Michelle Obama? Like that's like her vibe. Like she's such a go-getter. She's like, what if you just went to Chinese school? And so one of the ways that she kind of got me to stay, because it was an all-day affair on like a Saturday, was fan dance, which I loved. I loved dancing.
Yes.
And also erhu, because I was like, all right, I'll learn if there's an instrument, like I'll go. Yeah, so I don't know.
Shout out to mom.
Yeah, shout out to my mom. I love her. But I'd say mostly the instruments that I use when I'm producing are piano and guitar, and a little bit of clarinet sometimes. It can add like a nice little texture.
I was going to say, when I first saw you a few months ago at the Gold Beams Valentine's Day event, I was blown away at your multimedia vocal expression and presentation. Like, I've never seen anyone create a beat in the moment with the laptop and the keyboard and then start singing along with it on the mic. It seemed improv, but structured.
Thank you. That was what I was going for. Sometimes working with electronic instruments can sometimes feel a little bit impersonal. And I think if you layer things and like really go through it, it gives that organic live feel. So thank you. I appreciate that. That's what I was going for.
Yeah,
Live looping is stressful though. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, no, it was the layering for me because like it started one thing, then added another, then another. I said, "Oh, who is this person?" Because the whole setup was totally different from anything else that night. Yeah, it was such an experience to be in that space, and you came on stage, hair looking fly, outfit was fly. Then they brought out a table. I said, "Now what is sis about to do?" She got all this extra going on. The setup is taking forever. What we about to see? And it was phenomenal. It was great. Uh, I did catch some clips, and I think I did repost like on our stories a little bit. But how was that night for you?
That night was, I mean, it was incredible. It was like, it was very surreal. But I think it's funny because now I can like look back at it and laugh. It was also just such a stressful night. Like I get pretty bad stage fright, honestly.
Oh,
Which, and I always have ever since I was a kid. And it's funny because I've been reading this book sort of to kind of help me overcome it. It's this book called Effortless Mastery by Kenny Werner, which is a really good book. I think anybody who's a musician should read it. Kind of about entering this like intuitive flow state with music and not, putting so much pressure on it to sound good. But yeah, anyway, I mean, that was like an incredible night. But I remember in the moment being so nervous. It was a huge crowd. It was the largest crowd I'd performed in front of since 2020. So it had been a minute. And also I knew I was trying something different. And so there's, the anxiety that comes along with that. But yeah, it was a wonderful night. I mean, I had performed at a Gold Beams event for their open mic. That was kind of like the qualifying round, I guess, for the New Parish event on Valentine's Day. And that event I was super nervous for also, and it went well. But I think my like main takeaway was also just being kind of impressed and really moved by how many incredible artists there were, especially Black artists. Like,
yeah.
I think, that's maybe like one of my favorite things about the Bay. I want to say my favorite thing, but there's so much that I love about here. But yeah, just the amount of musicians here. I met musicians that night who are really like dear friends of mine now. Also, just I was really surprised by how warm and supportive everybody is, even among people competing. Pretty much everybody that competed that night. Like I love keeping tabs on and seeing what music they're making, and it feels nice to be in community like that. I think that's one of my favorite things about Gold Beams is the way that they're able to do that in a really supportive and just free flowing way.
Yes. Community and connection is what we're about here in the Bay Area. And I'm glad Gold Beams was able to make that space for you and for more and more of us to discover you,
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Yeah, I feel it's so funny looking back on the past year because my life already feels so different from what it was like a year ago. I feel like I've grown a lot as an artist. I feel like I trust myself more with the music that I make. I also have performed live more. And that's my favorite thing. I think, I love recording and I love making music on my own, and from my bedroom and stuff. But really performing live is where it's at, especially doing live sets with a band. Like that's how I'm used to making music. Like Oakland is a really great place for that.
It's always a joy to hear folks who are not from here talk about, the Bay Area being a welcoming place. And it gives me personal joy, for folks to come in and feel like they've, found a second home or a new home.
I mean, honestly, I'm down to live here forever, full stop. No, I mean it. My parents always make fun of me because they're like, so you're just never coming back? And I'm like, yeah, I love it here. Like, I mean, I just know like for a fact that I want to be here in the long term.
So to circle back, to your music and for folks discovering you for the first time, how would you describe your musical style?
Oh, this is a good question. Oh, I feel like my anxiety goes through the roof whenever I have to describe my music, though. I'm trying to think, how would I describe it? I mean, it's like an assortment of influences. I'd say honestly, it's really just inspired by music that I listen to in the car with my parents. So, for example, like on my dad's side, he was really my dad is super into jazz, and I also studied jazz in school. So, that's like a really big influence in my music. It's definitely how I approach songwriting. But then on the other hand, my dad, he was a radio DJ in college. So he's into tons of weird stuff. And he really loves like, you know, kind of like 90s, like boom bap, like hip hop. And that's a huge influence for me.
Did we have the same dad?
Right. Are you my cousin?
Because my dad was totally the same. He loves jazz. He was a DJ at some point. That's so funny.
Yeah, exactly. That's so funny. I feel like I rarely meet people whose dads are also DJs. It's you know, it's a funny kind of like thing to have your dad be into, because I feel like dads already are so like their music taste is Bible. And when you have a dad who's actually a music head, then it's like you really just can't argue. I was definitely not touching the CD player in the car. Like it was that was my school. Then on the other hand, right, my mom is really into, you know, she's a child of the 60s and 70s. So she's really into 70s soul, and like I grew up listening to the Delphonics, stuff, yes. You know, stuff like that. So I think that really influences my sound. And then also like, yeah, I think like I guess if I had to describe my music, it would be influenced by that, by jazz and by, you know, soul, and even like a little bit of disco. I've been kind of into this sort of like dreamy, sort of abstract disco sound that I think is really big in the Bay Area, actually. And then also like in terms of like vocal production, I love Imogen Heap and like Bjork. And just like weird white women making sounds.
Yeah.
Like, I love that. Yeah, you know, sort of like experimental R&B and, you know, jazz and soul and stuff like that.
Dani, it's been great chatting with you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thank you for having me, Andrea.
Yeah, tell the people where they can find you.
Yes, well, they can find me here in Oakland. Well, I mean, I'm on Instagram as Dani.Offline. And I'm also on Twitter at Dani_offline. But yeah, just Dani Offline on all platforms.
Thank you so much. And thank you, all of you out there listening and supporting another season. This has been another episode of The Black Landscape, where Black excellence is always trending.